Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, a few minutes ago, we played a clip from the House floor where, as the end of the Illinois General Assembly session nears, the end of this month, you had House Democrats working diligently to set up those interchamber sporting events, the softball and basketball games between the House and the Senate.
And, of course, you need cheerleaders, too.
Pom-poms.
So
Yeah, pom-pom
the female
girls.
lawmakers are, getting the squad back together, deciding what they're going to wear, what routine they're going to work on. It's fascinating stuff.
If Barbara Flynn Curry tries to cheer during one of those games, she will disintegrate into a pile of dust.
Well, I heard that she's on top of the pyramid this year.
God, please.
And the little.
Please cover that up. But that's not all they're doing. They're also looking to try and put gun shops out of business. So you have Chicago Democrats, it's the old story of the scorpion and the frog. It's just their nature. Mm-hmm. They don't do anything to quell violent crime in Chicago, so they have to blame suburban gun shops. Richard M. Daley was an impresario at this. You got Father Flagler. And now you got Senator Don Harmon, a socialist from Oak Park, who's advanced legislation called the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. And for more on what that act would do from an actual practitioner in the space, we're pleased to be joined by Dan Eldridge, who is the owner of Maxon's Shooter Supplies and Indoor Range in Des Plaines. Dan, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, John and Amy, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is their nature. They just can't help themselves. Illinois passed this hot mess of a bill at the end of April by a single vote, and it will be heard in the House next week, at least in committee.
So what does it mean?
What it means is state control of what we do, how we operate our business. So what will it do in terms of stopping the mayhem in Chicago? Absolutely nothing. The gangbangers do not buy their firearms from firearm dealers. That's proven time and time again, surveys of Cook County inmates, so on and so forth. But what it will also do is it will harass legitimate law-abiding dealers and law-abiding gun owners a lot.
But now Senator Harmon says they have traced back to 3 suburban gun shops, 17% of the guns used in the commission of crimes. And so all they want to do is set up a licensing board to oversee the operation of gun shops in Illinois. That will be comprised of stakeholders from a range of perspectives and, just to try and ensure that suburban gun shops like yours aren't selling guns to criminals that use them to commit crimes.
Well, like most propagandists, they say things that sound on the surface perfectly reasonable, or as they like to say, commonsensical. But the reality is they're misleading people, and they know they're misleading people. When they say a gun is traced back to a dealer, all that's telling you is where that gun was originally purchased when it was new, period. It does not tell you whether the gun was recovered at a crime scene, legally possessed, illegally possessed, what have you. These guns that are recovered in crime scenes are an average of 9 to 13 years old. 90+% of them were obtained illegally by criminals. Mm-hmm. So this is the equivalent of holding a car dealer responsible for a DWI fatality 10 years later by somebody who bought the car used. It has absolutely nothing to do with my business or my customers.
So with this bill, they're simply trying to drive you out of business. What can you do to protect yourself? How can you fight back?
We are encouraging our customers and customers across the state, voters across the state, to contact your state representative. Tell him or her that you oppose SB 1657, gun dealer licensing. The other side has slick propaganda. They've got slick social media. They've got all the Bloomberg money, but they don't have our numbers. There's 2.1 million gun owners in Illinois, and I'm very, very optimistic that our message is being heard in Springfield.
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, that not that anything should be taken for granted given the climate in this state and the Democrats in charge in both chambers of the General Assembly, but Governor Ronner is going to veto this bill if it would get out of the House and get to his desk, and they're not going to have the votes to override it. So this is, I don't think, going to become law, and thank goodness you have a Republican governor like Ronner who respects the individual Second Amendment rights of Illinois residents. That's one thing to consider as you think about 2018. But I wanted to go to something on this too, because the as you talked about the Orwellian nature of the rhetoric used and the descriptions applied to legislation. Gun dealer licensing board. All we want to do is a little bit of licensing, a little bit of oversight. Dan, tell us about what kind of licensing and oversight a federally licensed firearm dealer has and goes through to maintain.
Sure. Right now, every dealer principal, every dealer owner, it has a thorough background check that's conducted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives, ATF. It's conducted with the FBI. It is a thorough, in-depth background check. Every employee at my shop who has access to firearms or ammunition possesses a FOID card. Most possess a concealed carry permit. These all are layers of background checks. There's no more background checking that you can do, and frankly, calling for more background checks is just simply a waste of scarce law enforcement resources. The Illinois State Police does not have unlimited people or time. They have real work to do. This feel-good make work just simply squanders scarce resources from the state police.
And speaking of police, Des Plaines Police Department recently described your gun store as a fortress, right?
Right. A couple of dinglings tried to break in one night, and they got away with a box of cardboard. Congratulations. We take security very seriously. This is a serious business, and we take the business very seriously. We don't need a panel from the state government telling us how to run our business.
Now, on the other side, too, so we talked about the regulations that you're under as an owner, operator, licensed dealer. Now, I just recently purchased a few more weapons to add to my arsenal from Gat Guns out in Dundee, no offense. And, just tell us the paperwork and the background that a customer goes through, because even though I have a law degree, I felt like I needed an attorney present to fill out all of the paperwork I had to fill out in my last purchase. So just speak to that a bit, if you would.
Sure. We don't have instant background checks in Illinois. And while it's somewhat inconvenient to buyers, it actually provides a nice opportunity for the dealer to make sure that the paperwork is correct. An individual walks into a shop. First, they have to possess a FOID card if they're going to purchase a firearm. They choose their firearm, fill out the ATF's Form 4473, which has all sorts of identifying information on it, a questionnaire. One of the questions on the questionnaire is, are you buying this firearm for another person? They have to check that box appropriately. That paper is retained by the gun shop for the entire life of the gun shop. The Illinois State Police will then run a background check on the individual until we get a positive answer back from the state police. We will not release the gun. We will not complete the sale to anyone who has not gotten the okay from the Illinois State Police on a background check. Handguns, mandatory 3-day wait. Long guns, mandatory 1-day wait.
So is it harder to fill out a mortgage application or to fill out an application for a firearm?
Right.
That's a great question.
Yeah, this legislation, like you've seen before, I'm sure, as you pay attention to this stuff because it directly impacts your business. What would it do for gun shop owners like you in terms of the operation of your business? Because I've heard from other gun shop owners who are smaller say basically this would the requirements of this legislation would put me out of business. Be specific, if you would.
Sure. We would estimate, just in talking with the Office of Professional Licensing in Springfield and the governor's office, the best estimates are the license itself would be about $5,000, which is going to put a lot of the smaller people, they're just not going to find it worth doing it at that point. But what's worse is they set up a board of 5 people, at least 3 of whom, more likely 4 of whom, have an axe to grind against guns. This board is what's setting all of the rules and standards. None of this is set in the Act, so everything in here is to be determined. Well, okay, if they've just created an open framework, we have to assume it's going to be as bad as possible. Given a Democrat administration in the future, you have to assume the worst. So they set what our security needs to look like. They set training requirements for our staff. The chief law enforcement officer or county sheriff has to give me a permission slip to operate. All of these things add up, and on the surface, again, like any propaganda, they sound perfectly reasonable and common sense. But what if the board said, well, we think that 10 hours a week of training is essential to the safe operation of a gun shop? We have no recourse. They've suspended all of the due process for these sorts of licensing hearings. Unlimited complaints, anonymous complaints, and we can't answer with evidence that, no, we're not breaking the law. We have to go down to Springfield and sit before this board with an attorney. They can basically bleed anyone to death with this law.
For the smaller operators, even a requirement for on the security system piece of it could put you out of business. It could be in the tens of thousands of dollars.
We have to, under the law, every transaction must be videotaped. Every 4473 being filled out must be videotaped. And the videotape must be retained for 90 days on premises. So no cloud storage, no nothing. I don't know if you've ever worked with video surveillance before, but anything of reasonable quality, 90 days is a gargantuan amount of data. And yeah, that would for sure put a lot of people out of the game.
All right, Dan Eldridge, the owner of Maxon's Shooter Supplies and Indoor Range and Displays. He penned a piece on this topic for the Chicago Tribune, if you want to check that out as well. Again, it's Senate Bill 1657, the so-called Gun Dealer Licensing Act, if you want to contact your state reps as it moves from the Senate over to the House. Dan, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.